On a warm April evening in 1968, a single gunshot echoed across Memphis, a sound that would ripple far beyond one balcony, one man, one moment. Within minutes, the world was told a simple story. A lone gunman. A closed case. Justice served. But for decades, quiet questions have lingered in the shadows of that official version. Across courtrooms, newsrooms, and family living rooms, a different narrative has slowly taken shape, one filled with missing files, sealed testimony, and witnesses who claimed the truth was never fully told. What if one of the most defining moments of American history is still only partially understood? What if the official story left out forces far larger than one man pulling a trigger? In Europe, headlines carried the news with disbelief. In Africa and Asia, Dr. King's assassination was seen not just as an American tragedy, but as a blow to a global movement for dignity and justice. Diplomats spoke in hushed tones. Activists held vigils. And behind closed doors, intelligence agencies reviewed documents that would never fully see the light of day. Years later, members of Dr. King's own family would question the conclusions. A civil trial would quietly challenge the official narrative. Witnesses would emerge with stories that didn't fit neatly into the record. And somewhere in the silence between what was said and what was buried, a deeper mystery remained. Could it be that history moved on too quickly? Could powerful interests have shaped what the public was allowed to believe? And if so, what does that say about how truth is constructed in moments of national trauma? If stories like this fascinate you, subscribe to join us as we uncover hidden global truths. And tell us, where are you watching from? Because tonight, we're not just revisiting a moment in history. We're stepping into the unanswered questions that still echo more than half a century later. The Lorraine Motel stood quietly along Mulberry Street, its pale exterior offering no hint that it was about to become one of the most photographed locations in modern history. Room 306 had become a familiar gathering place for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his inner circle. Laughter, strategy, fatigue, and hope all shared that narrow balcony. It was a space where history felt close enough to touch. Dr. King had come to Memphis to support striking sanitation workers, men who carried signs reading "I am a man," a simple declaration that echoed across America's deep racial divides. The movement was not only about wages. It was about dignity. It was about visibility. And in the final year of his life, Dr. King had begun expanding his mission beyond civil rights, toward economic justice and opposition to the Vietnam War, positions that unsettled powerful institutions. Federal agencies were watching closely. Surveillance had followed him for years. Internal memos described him as a destabilizing figure. Abroad, foreign governments monitored his speeches, seeing him as both a moral force and a political variable in a Cold War world where image mattered as much as ideology. In Moscow, in London, in newly independent African nations, his words carried weight that extended far beyond American borders. On April 4th, as evening light settled over Memphis, Dr. King stepped onto the balcony. He leaned over the railing, speaking casually to those below. Then, in an instant, the sound shattered the air. A shot. Sharp. Final. Chaos followed. Friends pointed. People screamed. An ambulance arrived too late to change history's direction. Within hours, a narrative began forming. Authorities moved quickly to define what had happened, and who was responsible. The nation was given a story that promised clarity at a moment when grief demanded answers. James Earl Ray, a fugitive with a criminal past, was identified as the man behind the rifle. A lone assassin. A closed loop of cause and consequence. Television screens across America repeated the same framing. In Europe, news anchors spoke of a tragic but contained act of violence. In Africa, newspapers mourned a fallen global symbol. The world absorbed the version it was given. But even in those first hours, small details felt unsettled. Witnesses offered conflicting descriptions. Timelines blurred. And some close to Dr. King felt an unease they couldn't yet name, a sense that the story being told moved faster than the evidence could comfortably support. The official narrative was already solidifying. But beneath it, questions were beginning to form. In the days that followed, investigators moved with urgency, but also with remarkable certainty. A rifle was discovered near a boarding house bathroom window. Fingerprints were matched. A name was attached to the crime with striking speed. For a nation in shock, the simplicity of the explanation offered a fragile sense of closure. Yet for some observers, the rapid assembly of the case felt less like discovery and more like a decision, as though the conclusion had been waiting for the evidence to catch up. Behind the scenes, key elements of the investigation raised quiet concerns. The crime scene was altered quickly. Witness statements shifted. Evidence that could have clarified angles, distances, and timing was not preserved in ways that would later satisfy independent analysts. To critics, these were not just procedural errors. They were cracks in a story that depended on precision. Each missing detail became a space where doubt could quietly grow. Internationally, the reaction carried a different tone. While public condolences filled newspapers, diplomats and foreign journalists privately questioned whether the killing of such a globally influential figure could truly be the work of a single disconnected individual. In capitals far from Memphis, the assassination was viewed through a geopolitical lens, a moment that exposed the fragility of American moral leadership during a turbulent era. The world mourned, but some also watched carefully, sensing that more lay beneath the surface. As months turned into years, the official version of events hardened into history. Court records closed. Headlines moved on. For the public, the case seemed settled. But in quieter spaces, among independent journalists, civil rights lawyers, and intelligence watchers, the story never truly ended. Instead, it transformed into something more complex, a puzzle scattered across sealed documents, classified memos, and testimonies that rarely reached primetime news. Government agencies had compiled vast files on Dr. King long before his death. Surveillance transcripts, internal communications, psychological profiles, a shadow archive built around a man whose growing influence had begun to intersect uncomfortably with state power. When portions of these files later surfaced, they revealed not just monitoring, but deep institutional anxiety. Dr. King was no longer seen merely as a civil rights leader. He was increasingly framed as a figure who could disrupt political stability, economic order, and America's global image. In foreign capitals, analysts followed these revelations with quiet attention. European intelligence services exchanged briefings. African leaders, many of whom had viewed Dr. King as a symbol of post-colonial dignity, questioned how a nation that promoted democracy abroad could allow such unresolved doubts at home. Each newly released document raised the same unsettling thought: if so much had been hidden before, what else had never been released at all? The more researchers pulled at the edges of the record, the clearer it became that the case was less a closed book and more a locked room, filled with papers, recordings, and decisions that shaped what the public would be allowed to know. Decades after the assassination, a civil trial in Memphis quietly reopened the story in a way most Americans never fully noticed. Unlike criminal court, this proceeding focused on responsibility rather than guilt, and its outcome would challenge the foundation of the lone gunman theory. After hearing weeks of testimony, the jury concluded that Dr. King's death was the result of a broader conspiracy, involving more than one individual. The verdict made headlines briefly, then faded from public conversation with surprising speed. For Dr. King's family, the decision confirmed long-held doubts. They spoke publicly about their belief that the full truth had never been told. Their statements echoed across international media, where the case was framed not just as an American legal matter, but as a reflection of how nations handle uncomfortable history. In parts of Europe and Africa, commentators described the verdict as a reminder that official narratives can outlast evidence, shaping memory even when facts remain contested. The reaction inside the United States was more divided. Some dismissed the trial as symbolic. Others saw it as a quiet rupture in a long-standing historical account. What remained undeniable was this: a legal body had formally recognized the possibility of a larger plot, and yet, no sweeping reinvestigation followed. The files remained. The questions remained. And the space between what was acknowledged and what was acted upon grew wider. Time has softened some of the sharpest edges of 1968, but it has not erased the unease surrounding Dr. King's final moments. For younger generations, the assassination is often encountered as a paragraph in a textbook, a tragedy summarized in a few lines. Yet for those who lived through the era, the unanswered questions never fully faded. They lingered in conversations, in documentaries, in quiet doubts passed from one generation to the next. Around the world, Dr. King's image continued to grow, even as the circumstances of his death remained unsettled. Streets were named after him. Statues were raised. His words were taught in classrooms from South Africa to Scandinavia. But in those same places, scholars and activists also asked a harder question: how does a society honor a figure while leaving the deepest questions about his death unresolved? The contrast created a strange global paradox: celebration layered over uncertainty. In that space, the assassination became more than a crime. It became a mirror, a reflection of how power, memory, and official history interact. Each unanswered detail became part of a larger pattern, one that suggested truth is not always revealed all at once, but shaped slowly, through pressure, silence, and time. For many, the unresolved nature of Dr. King's assassination has come to represent something larger than a single event. It stands as a reminder that history is often written in layers: the public version, the legal version, and the version that lives in collective memory. When those layers do not align, a quiet tension forms, one that can last for generations. The case became less about certainty and more about the cost of not knowing. Across different cultures, similar patterns are recognized. Nations carry unresolved moments like emotional fault lines, places where truth and power intersect uncomfortably. From Latin America to Eastern Europe, citizens understand how official stories can persist even when doubts remain. In this way, Dr. King's story became part of a broader global language, a symbol not only of justice, but of how fragile truth can be when institutions feel threatened by it. In the end, perhaps the most lasting legacy is not only Dr. King's life or even his death, but the question his assassination still asks of the world: how much truth is a society willing to confront about itself? The silence around certain answers may be as meaningful as the answers themselves, a quiet reminder that history is not just what happened, but what is allowed to be fully understood. In the end, stories like this remind us that history is never as simple as it appears in headlines. Behind every official conclusion, there are human decisions, institutional pressures, and unanswered questions that shape what future generations come to accept as truth. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is not only a moment frozen in time, it is a living reminder that justice and memory are deeply connected. Around the world, people continue to look to his words for guidance, even as the full truth of his final day remains incomplete. And perhaps that is why this story still matters, not only for what it reveals about one man, but for what it reveals about how societies handle uncomfortable truths. If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep, cinematic explorations into hidden global stories, consider subscribing. Because sometimes, the most important questions are the ones history never fully answered.